um, Social Roots is a platform for cross-group collaboration to try and get us out of the tangled email threads where a lot of wicked problem solvers end up trying to wrangle social and environmental things like food security or housing or whatnot. And so we're building this. We are ourselves a cooperative, a worker-owned co-op, and we're also planning in the next, we know it will take a while because it's not a known science, but we want all of our users to have the option to join as actual legal owners of a data trust, a data trustee, for how our data is managed on a social platform, which if anybody watched Facebook the other day, it's kind of funny. So that's me. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Christina. And next we have Kate Sassy Sassoon joining us from Zebras United.
Yeah, hi folks. It's just want to just shout from the rooftops. I have a degree in ecology, so I'm like, yes, knowledge ecologist. That's amazing. So excited. I'm Kate or Sassy, whichever y'all prefer. I've lived and worked my entire life in various flavors of co-op and collective. I have been part of housing co-ops, daycare co-ops, worker co-ops. I have the kind of benefit of a literal lifetime of lived experience in this. It's all the other models that look weird to me. This model is normal. And so I also have a couple degrees from Berkeley. I have a lot of lived experience in how to do essentially human systems engineering and a lot of kind of social justice movement building work. And I kind of bring all of that together through both my own business. I run a consultancy called Sassy Facilitation, where I basically help co-ops and other flavors of organization that are attempting to do stuff better together to, do that more equitably, fairly, efficiently, productively. And then also bring all that to Zebras Unite, which is a really amazing kind of new flavor of multi-stakeholder, multi-headed organization that's trying to really create a new narrative for entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship and new funding structures, new community structures, and new culture and culture shift work for that. So there's a lot of fun stuff in there, but my particular passion and kind of deep dive on is communication and governance systems. Because if you can talk to each other well and you can decide things together well, everything else flows from there. So that's the kind of place where I play the most and where I do the most design work. So it's my nerd happy place. So it's really lovely to be here. I'm super excited about this. Greg?
Hey everyone, my name is Greg Brodsky. I got into cooperative development because about 18 years ago now, I helped form a nationwide purchasing co-op of retail bicycle stores. Did that for 10 years and learned a lot about cooperatives and cooperatives at scale. Actually left and worked in the tech sector for a little while and got excited about sort of lean startup and agile. And I got really intrigued about, well, co-ops are great, but they take a long time, and tech startups are fast, but they're not always values aligned. And how do we bring together the best of both worlds? How would you bring together sort of the values alignment of cooperative ownership and sort of this agile lean thing of tech startups? So been thinking about that ever since. Got pulled back in to do a few other co-ops, served on the board of a nonprofit that helps to create co-ops. And about 5 years ago, a few of us were talking about, co-ops are so great, why aren't there more of them? And so we formed an accelerator called Start.coop to help lift up a handful of businesses every year to make it easier for those cooperatives through investment, curriculum, mentorship, coaching, and connecting to service providers. So my full-time job these days is running Start.coop with a co-director, and we've graduated 18 companies over the last 3 years. And the last class was actually Zebras Unite, which was awesome to work with Sassy and their team. And then we also had a team out of New York called the Drivers Co-op that by member count is actually now the largest worker co-op in the US, which is crazy because they only launched 4 months ago. But they already have over 3,000 drivers. So pleasure to be here.
Excellent. I'm excited for you all to get to know each other and to, pitch and talk off of each other's points. So before we get started, I just want to make sure that we have a little bit of clarity around some of these words that we're using. Sassy, would you be able to define cooperative versus worker-owned for us?
So a cooperative is a group of people coming together to meet common social, cultural, and economic needs, goals, or aspirations, right? It's a big bucket, lots of different flavors of alignment or grouping in there. A worker-owned cooperative is a particular flavor of that, which is where the members of that cooperative, so the people coming together to meet those needs, are the workers or the staff of an enterprise of some kind. So if you're like, say it's a cafe, you work at the cafe, you also own a share of the cafe, and the profits of the cafe are returned to you and you govern the cafe. So that's the worker component of who is the members. Anybody else?
Wonderful, thank you. Greg,
You know,
you look.
well, I was just going to add to it. I always throw out two stats when we talk about this. So one is that 76% of people would rather buy from a cooperative, which is a pretty high statistic. And yet 89% of people can't define what a cooperative is. And so there's this gap where people are like, I don't know exactly what it is. I know it's better than sort of a traditional model, but I can't exactly say what it is. There's this halo effect around cooperatives. So the way that very similar to what Sash is saying, the way that we talk about it is people are familiar with like a traditional ownership model where the people making the money over here and the people supporting the business over here. And really all we're trying to do is bring the Venn diagram together and say, what if the people support the business to actually own it? I think where it can get confusing for people, to Sassy's point about different kinds of co-ops, is you can have a consumer-owned company like REI, you can have a worker-owned company, you can have a small business-owned company. Ace Hardware is a co-op of 4,000 small business owners. And then you can even have a farmer-owned company like Land O'Lakes or Ocean Spray or Blue Diamond Almonds. So the fact that it can exist at any level of the supply chain confuses people. So we often explain that, your ownership model, who benefits from the business is different than the business model, how the company makes money. But really cooperative ownership is an ownership model.
Wonderful, thanks, Greg. Anything to add, Christina?
I think just to echo that confusion, I've heard people really quickly equate co-ops with nonprofits, and nonprofits, of course, can be co-ops. People have often not realized their credit union is a co-op of a kind. And so I think that language around it in America, I think there's a huge association with sort of hippie food co-ops and a real lack of understanding of the, I actually want to show this book, Collective Courage, A History of African-American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice, which is the first book written on Black cooperatives since 1907. And it's dry and scholarly and really, really good. And I just think that there's this kind of hippie co-op feeling. There's the member co-op that people kind of get, the REI credit union kind of thing. And then there's like this invisible actual economic practice in the history of America, deeply rooted, deeply tied to slavery, that just nobody really pays attention to right now. Or hopefully people are starting to, but it's really been invisible for years and years and years. And that's contrasted with that sort of tech platform cooperative movement, platform cooperativism coming out of New York, and very tech literate scene. And I think bringing all of these threads together and opening up the language around it is really important.
Wonderful. Awesome. So this time we'll start with Greg. Greg, what's been your best success around creating cooperative workspaces?
Yeah, well, going back to the confusion thing, I think people do conflate kind of different kinds of co-ops. And so, one thing that comes up, actually, Sass and I did a panel this year on governance, and we talked about the fact that sometimes people can conflate kind of direct democracy and representative democracy. So I think that's something that comes up for people a lot, is there are cooperatives where, it's all consensus, it's all direct democracy. every co-op is one member, one vote, but sometimes the co-op doesn't have every member voting on everything. So if you picture, maybe a four-person worker-owned coffee shop, they were probably all having to agree on things. But if you picture REI or Land O'Lakes or Ace Hardware, it's probably fairly hierarchical in terms of how it works. But then there's like an accountability structure. So I think one of the best successes I've seen is that regardless of whether you're direct or representative, is how do you build in that accountability loop, so that even if you have a little bit more of a layers to your co-op, whether you have a board or a management team or whatever it is, how does that group ultimately responsible to the membership? And so that could be through, the fact that the members elect the board. It can be through annual, what we call member satisfaction surveys. It can be annual member meetings, but kind of always making sure, like, who do you ultimately serve, right? The whole point of a co-op is you're not serving outside investors, you're serving the people themselves. And sometimes people can think that's all about some sort of like heavy-handed governance, and it can become about that. But I think for me, in its truest form, it's just about remembering these are the people we serve, and how do we bring them in to bring in their voice, and so that we are accountable to these people. So I'm sure you got things to add to that.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. I'm cherishing the kind of fun work we're getting to do on governance this year. I think in terms of, just to kind of return to the question, the most successful co-op, I've gotten to personally collaborate with or work on. That's always hard for me, because success is really, there's a lot of different rubrics for success, right? And one of the things I actually enjoy most as a person who's worked in non-cooperative workplaces and been a worker owner of several different enterprises, including one which was a conversion from a traditional business to a worker cooperative. And I even hesitate to say traditional, from a default business to a worker cooperative. The experience of co-ownership versus employeeship, for example, is really qualitatively different, right? My quality of life as a minimum wage caterer in a worker cooperative versus a very highly paid tech entrepreneur, my quality of life was actually better in the catering business, which is kind of interesting to say, because it's a very physically onerous business, because I had the experience of agency over my economic livelihood. And that's actually huge, and it's not really very tangible. It's undermeasured. So I'll share just a really quick story. A group that I've been working with since they converted to a cooperative, Cal Solar, a group in Grass Valley in Northern California. They're a solar installation group that decided to become a worker-owned cooperative. And they actually, so I've been supporting them through that conversion process for about 6 years. And the pandemic hit, and of course they had to shut down like everything. And then they managed to turn that into an opportunity to double their business and add an entirely new product line, because they were all in it together, and everybody pooled their ideas and labor and resources. And the employees really, it wasn't just a job and okay, it's going to suck if it goes away. It was their business, right? And it was, instead of just 3 people or a couple of co-founders or a general manager, it was 25 people. And that's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit and capital. It's a lot of human capital to deploy. And so I just feel like that's one of the reasons why we know, businesses that are articulated as cooperatives are, the latest stat I remember hearing is they're about 35% more resilient than comparable companies in comparable sectors when economic hard times hit. And that's one of the reasons why, is they just have that, the secret sauce of co-ownership and co-governance and buy-in. So I think that's what I'll share on that one. What you got, Christina?
That tees me up actually perfectly, because our structures set up, like the tension and the difference and the interplay between structure and process, I think is really fascinating in a co-owning shared ownership model. Once we get our structure set up and our member agreement set up and we're like legally ready to go, we know what the different boundaries are. Our biggest success as a small software team has been to have this literacy across the team, because of Agile, because of me, because of some of the stuff that Greg has been doing. And then I had the fortune to be in an early responsive org Slack, where this responsive org community was kind of the umbrella, looking at holacracy and flat army and teal and all these different models for, if we're not going to do hierarchy, what are we going to do? How do we not have chaos? And then combining that with this living systems approach that I'm deeply grounded in, is actually asking yourself the question of what works for you, what works for this team at this time, and recognizing the boundary that you're in, because what works for the 3 co-founding stewards of Social Roots might not work as we grow into a larger development team. And being able to choose what process, be intentional about saying, this is an actual ritual that we want to do, this is something that we want to add. If you have attention in this kind of way, here's a process that goes in it. And having those as light as possible, but as clear as possible at the same time. And that's just been magic. It's like really opened up the team in a way that I haven't experienced on any other team, honestly.
Hey, Kristen, I'll just add to what you're saying. I think that is part of the magic. And I think one of the challenges people have, and maybe we're about to get into challenges, but one of the challenges I think people have is, building that trust. There's so much pent up resentment that people have against their employers that, people are just taught, I can't trust my boss, I can't trust this big company, and getting people to actually like make that jump to co-ownership, and also sort of the mutualism of it, right? That like, there's some reciprocity. I'm looking out for you, you're looking out for me. We're all pulling in the same direction. We're all sitting on the same side of the table. That is a real culture and attitude shift that takes some people time to get there.
That's funny because it's very much similar when you're thinking in systems, and when you grow up thinking in systems and then you realize a lot of people don't, you also run into that fear of a paradigm shift. There's like a resistance to coming into this different way of working, different way of thinking that requires a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of risk that you might not have been enculturated to be comfortable with. And it can be very challenging and difficult for people.
You're absolutely right. This is we are getting to the challenge. Like, what is your greatest challenge been? So at this time, we'll start with Sassy.
So my greatest, what is the greatest challenge of stepping into a cooperativism or to creating or running a co-op? Is that kind of what we want to think?
Yeah. So what we learn best from our failures, not from our successes. So what challenge or failure has taught you the most?
Oh, okay, I got a fun story for y'all. So once upon a time, I was part of a worker cooperative. This was a for-profit anarchist bakery. Threading that needle was very fun. And we had to navigate the legacy dynamic from, so we were an anarchist solidarity bakery. We were formed in coalition with another group in Guatemala. And we were, but it was like a corner bakery, right? Strong community, really great recipes, really great kind of following. But then there was a group of members that decided that their values, the values of the company in solidarity with this group in Guatemala, needed to take on how they were being part of that their taxes as a business was being used to essentially participate in warmongering activities that were having active harmful consequences. They're like, this is a values proposition, we need to take this on. So in order for us to walk our talk as a business with these social entrepreneurial values we have of, we're not going to allow our economic participation to do harm, we need to take that on and address that. Unfortunately, what that resulted in is the group of co-opers who were 3 or 4 years down the line, of which I was one, had $150,000 US tax debt that we suddenly then had to reconcile, because it turns out you're also a business, not just a values-based organization. And so while we had succeeded in walking the talk of our values, we had failed in being a sustainable business. And ultimately, having a sustainable business means you have a place where you can enact values. And that is no longer a cooperative anymore. And so it was very challenging to essentially find the edges of how one kind of way to walk your value talk can work in a business or not. And we found the edge of where it does not work. With the groups of us that went on from that experience to be parts of other cooperatives, carried that lesson forward, right? And we tried to, instead of abstaining from economic participation, we tried to strategically wield that economic participation, more acknowledging that if you don't have a business, there's nothing to enact your values through. So that's the actual foundation. Have a company, and then you can use it to do things and use it to do paradigm shift work. So that's the one I'll share.
Oh, that would have been a doozy of a bill to get. How about you, Christina? What's been your biggest learning?
Two come to mind. One is, as we introduce new people, really culture is slow. So getting that culture to grow at any kind of rate is going to be a real challenge. Recognizing when a new boundary needs to emerge and how to imbue that team without hierarchical power over with that health grounded, cooperatively oriented practice, not just the structure, but the actual, like, whatever processes an individual team chooses, the principles of cooperative practice need to be embodied in the team, and that looks different every time. And so that's it's just a slow process. And I think that with the speed of growth and scale that software can have, that's going to be a huge challenge. We are, as a worker-owned limited cooperative association, which is a new kind of multi-stakeholder model of worker co-ops, we are in part actually, as a software company, building infrastructure to help address this challenge, which is to help groups at different scales coordinate. And one of the biggest challenges there is to get the right information to bubble up at the right time, because so many people, when they're working, are very, very close to their own Blackboard. And so how do we actually cooperate with others on other teams and across other teams, even within a single organizational boundary, never mind going across organizations, and get the right information to come forth without me having to spend a huge amount of time doing it, because otherwise it just doesn't get done. So that's a big pickle. It's a very big challenge, I think.
And over to you, Greg.
I'll share two quick ones. So one is, occasionally we get entrepreneurs who think that their ownership model is their business model, and maybe this has this point. So I'll give you an example. We had someone say, hey, we've got this failing restaurant in New York City. We're thinking we'll make it a worker co-op, and I'm like, okay, well, if it's a failing restaurant, shifting who owns it doesn't really solve the problem, right? Like, do you really want to own something as a worker that is losing money, to Sassy's point earlier around debt? So we get a lot of people are like, yeah, we'll just be a co-op, and it's magically kind of wipes away the need to, have enough money to pay our staff and all these different things. And it doesn't work that way. If the business is successful, you can accrue profits and you can share that with the workers, but the business still does need to work on its own. And then the other big challenge we see with entrepreneurs is this need to raise values aligned financing. We work with a lot of entrepreneurs who have a vision for scale. They want to really have a big impact in their space, but it's harder. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but it's just harder to raise money as a cooperative entrepreneur compared to maybe a traditional business. And so that's probably the biggest challenge that we hear a lot about. Is we interview entrepreneurs at the beginning of the program, and they say their biggest challenge is raising money. And at the end of the program, they still say their biggest challenge is raising money. So it definitely is more, it's a harder path. I think it's a more worthwhile path, but there are some added complexities to it.
Thank you for sharing. It's always really interesting to see where other people have stumbled or failed, and to try to figure out how we can do those better next time, or or learn and grow from each other's mistakes. So I always find this part of the conversation really interesting. So now we're gonna switch a little bit, and I'm gonna ask a question to each one of you. You get a couple of minutes to answer, and then we can get responses from the other two. So this time we will start with Christina. So how is social media making cooperatives more viable as we move to the future?
So social media, of course, can change the conversation, and that's where a lot of conversation is happening. We're moving away from the broadcast paradigm of the 50s and into this everybody for everybody. The language and breadth of understanding and clarifying of confusion that we were talking about earlier can actually be worsened or improved by social media, of course. And I hope that people can check out hashtags like Buy Twitter or Exit to Community that are looking at a little bit broader ways of looking at how to turn something that is traditional into a co-op, if you didn't happen to start there. And the Exit to Community, Nate Schneider and the MIT what is it called? Media Lab at Boulder, not MIT, is doing a really interesting practice in trying to get people to get involved in something that they don't even kind of really know is a co-op until they're actually in it and experiencing it. So looking at it through an experiential point of view by just having a campaign to get somebody interested in Exit to Community. Oh, that sounds good. I want to do it. And all of a sudden they're like involved in a co-op, and then they figure out what it is because they have motivation to do it. Because nobody really wants to sit around and talk about governance unless you're super governance nerds. Me. Yes, exactly. But what I really want to do is kind of flip this question on its head, because I actually think that co-ops could make social media more viable in the future. And again, all I have to do this week is say Facebook. And that's what we're doing. We at Social Roots, we're building a social media platform. We are intentionally taking the data, putting it in containers. We have to do that sort of manually at first, but we're going to do it legally and eventually with the actual distributed technologies that are coming and kind of at the bleeding edge of tech right now, and put the data in the legal ownership of the users. And so I think that would completely change how social media is motivated and what the incentives are. And yeah, I'm excited about it. I don't know what to say right now, but that aspect of it, of if we are accelerating and learning to use this new networked brain that the world has, that's called the internet, shared ownership is so important, because otherwise you don't own your own brain as a part of the human race.
Oh, I'm going to jump real quick on that because that just really speaks to me. My father was a NASA roboticist and computer scientist, and so I was raised in the world of open source and early 1980s robotics. And for me, I have watched and participated in, I'm internet generation, right? I'm firmly in that age demographic, and I have participated in that with a little bit of eyes wide open. And something that has always puzzled me and has also been like when Christina mentioned the kind of buy Twitter moment, where it was like, oh no, we could what if everybody using Twitter owned it? Just like, what would be different? And to me, I'm like, oh well, duh. The so much of the internet is based and built on open source, which is basically cooperativism, right? It's sharing. It's what's like the Creative Commons license suite that enables us to share things in creative and structured and channeled fashions comes from that. So from where I'm sitting, it's kind of a duh. It's not very revolutionary at all, that this resource is of the commons, should be of the commons, and just needs to kind of come back toward it. And it's already structured that way. It's just that some people have, put up fences around the commons, and we know what to do with those. We just take those down, and we're going to have to, so we might as well.
So Christina, when will people be able to start joining Social Roots as social media members?
So we're, I don't want to say any dates, but sometime next year, we have a feature or two that's live and being banged on by some early users. We're doing, if you think you're a really great early use case, we are opening it up to people who are willing to do some co-design and give us some rapid feedback. And anybody who's signing up on the website now will get early access email as soon as we have something ready. So I'll put the website link in there.
Awesome. All right, and now we'll jump to Greg. So how has so your question is kind of how has your finance journeys gone as you lead your company as a co-op and you lead the incubators? What would you do better or differently next time as well?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to double click a little bit on sort of what the financing journey has been for entrepreneurs overall. And I actually put some of these thoughts in a blog post. I'll put in the chat in case you guys want to read it later. But I would say, there's a lot of businesses that need to raise some outside financing, and cooperatives are not an exception there. And the problems are that the ability to have enough money to start a company is a function of race and gender and social network. And so, there are people who have enough money to sit back and do it. And there's a lot of people that are like, I can't afford to not do my regular job for X amount of time and wait for this thing to take off. And so while we work with some entrepreneurs who, their business just takes off right away, or maybe the startup costs are low, I would say that that's actually the exception. There's a lot that need to raise some outside capital. And so there's a common problem, which is that in the very beginning, when a company is a startup, the money that might be available is like loan funds or banks, but they don't want to work with startups. And so how do you kind of solve that? In the Bay Area, where I think most people on the call are, obviously VC and angel investors have sort of said, well, we'll take that early risk, but that early risk is based on the idea that somehow there's going to be this exit, which really means we're going to sell the company or be acquired or IPO'd or some version of that. But if you think about what we're trying to do with cooperative ownership, we're not trying to sell the company. We're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to create long-term ownership. So there is no exit. And so we don't have the equivalent of that early stage venture capital money that's going to come in and take that equity position. And so there are ways to kind of engineer solutions out of it, but you have to get a lot more creative. And so this is probably a conversation I have with 3 entrepreneurs a week right now, which is that you essentially need to think about ways to, if you do decide you have a model that you want to take on some outside investors, you need to essentially budget out of company cash to pay out those investors. So you can allocate a small portion of revenue, or you can budget a small portion of profit to pay back investors over time. But it's not based on this like exit thing. You're not going to get venture capital people. You got to, and so what we work with teams in the accelerator on is, how do you find the people who really care about your model and the social impact you're creating in your business? One of our speakers this year said that he had never met someone who started a co-op who wasn't a little bit pissed off, and that was the reason they started a co-op. And I've thought about that a lot ever since. And I think you got to find the people who are pissed off like you and who care about this cause, who want to lend money in or put some money in. But I would say this question of how you sort of bring in values aligned financing and find your particular community is definitely one of the biggest challenges. And happy to talk more about that in the breakout sessions, because usually we get a lot of questions about that. I'll put the link in the chat if you guys want to read more.
I totally want to read more.
Christina,
you got that.
Can I ask one question about that? It seems like there's also, like, in tandem with more interesting co-ops and people trying to find out how to finance co-ops, there's also this more interest in social impact and sort of patient capital. And that seems, I mean, my exposure to that has been more in the like regenerative ag movement and kind of boots on the ground efforts. And I'm wondering if those two are kind of going along in parallel or if they're kind of colliding. And I don't know.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Yeah, I mean, the way that we talk about it is there's a growing amount of people who feel like there's a gap between what their values are and where their money is invested, right? And when I explain to people that way, people are like, yes, I feel that way. But most people, right, like I'm sure people on this call have a retirement plan through their work or have a 401k or whatever it is, right? And so you invest in the stock market because you're like, that's my option. And so I think what we're trying to do, whether your particular bent is environmental or gender rights or shared ownership or wealth inequality, there's different flavors of it for sure. But I think what those of us in kind of the social impact investing world we're trying to do is say, here is an option where you can move some of your money over, and we're not trying to tell people to move 100% of their money over because frankly, we probably don't have the track record and width of options that maybe the S&P 500 does, but at least to start moving some of your money over into activities that do reflect your values and your choices. And I do think those are intersecting in good ways. And the question is kind of how we grow that audience. So we've been spending a lot of our time there trying to bring in accredited investors. So we actually launched a small fund now of accredited investors that want to invest in shared ownership. And the goal is is literally to find those people and to say, let's bring some money together to support these ventures.
Thank you.
I just want to say that I love the financing design criteria of find the people that are pissed off like you.
That is awesome.
I think that's actually really good advice. Because the times that I've been handed checks for my businesses is when we got into a place of conversation where folks were like, oh, that bothers you too. That isn't okay. And then we got on that and then we're like, oh no, we're willing to have each other's back now about this. So I think that's both flippant and real good advice.
Wonderful. That'll be our tweet. Find the people who are pissed off the same way.
But it is about, I know we got to go to the next question, but it is about sort of creating your tribe. I don't know those of you who follow like Seth Godin, but his whole thing is like, find the smallest possible audience that really cares about what you're doing, right? And that is the tribe you're building. So you're building this tribe of your members, but you also have to, if you do bring an outside investment, you have to build this tribe of the people who want to support what you're doing. Oh, you're on mute, Amy.
There we go. Sassy, I believe it was a Zebra panel discussion that I saw that was talking about changes to the laws allowing more capital and more grants to be able to go to cooperatives in Colorado.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Access to Capital for Cooperatives Act moment. I was giving a co-op orientation during that lovely event, so I wasn't there. So I haven't soaked in all of that knowledge, but one of, just in my work as a kind of co-op technical assistant through my work at Sassy Facilitation for all these years, the number one barrier I have seen to co-op, the money getting to co-ops is often strange federal rules about what they may or may not receive because of how they're classified as a business, and strange bureaucracies inside the federal and state and local small business administrations that result in capital going to everybody but cooperatives, even though by the numbers, they want to give money to small businesses that help reduce the wealth gap, or small businesses that keep money local and train local, so they fight gentrification or displacement. And by the numbers, co-ops do those things better than most other default forms of business, and yet they were somehow left out of the loop. So I'm really happy that legislation is coming and being tested forward, because it's a fairly easy solve, of course, assuming that bureaucracy and democracy is easy, which it of course is not. But that one's a pretty, there's a system intervention that can be made there, and I'm glad it's starting to be made. I'm interested to see what happens as ripples outward from that, as more and more test cases become viable through that funding and financing. So I'm excited about it.
Me too. I'm really looking forward to how this kind of shifts. So now that kind of brings us to the question we have for you, Sassy. So what are the structures of governance and decision making that you've seen work really well in some of the places that you've been?
So this is where I often piss off a lot of purists because I'm actually system agnostic. I don't care whether you use consensus or Robert's rules or 51% vote or everybody's got to agree. I don't care. The right form of making decisions is the one that serves your group. That is the right way to do it, right? And it is going to be unique because people are unique and so are their needs and contexts and your structures and culture of origin, your context that you're in, the goals that you have for your roadmap, that what you want to do, and what I do most often with the folks I work with when we're trying to design or redesign their kind of governance system, which again, I say that's how you talk to each other. So like every time y'all have a meeting, every time there's a bulletin board, every time there's an announcement, that's all like the communication landscape of your company. That's where you're creating culture, and culture is where decision-making and governance actually lives. Right? It lives in votes, it lives in formal meetings, but it actually lives in the spaces between people, which is every day, all the time, everywhere, right? And so you have to consciously cultivate a proactive and cooperative culture to support good decision-making. If you have one but not the other, you don't actually have either. And so the way you do that is you come together as a crew at whatever level your shared governance exists. And you make sure that, if you're a very small group, if you're a startup or a small worker-owned cooperative or small data sharing cooperative, whatever you are, if you're small, the distance between you is smaller. And so you can come together in one room and co-design that. It's always helpful to do that with someone from the outside, just to have that holding that neutral space so that everybody in the space actually gets to fully participate and doesn't have to hold that tension of, well, I'm going to be neutral for a moment and now I'm going to be real and now I'm going to be neutral. If you're bigger, if you're a really large scale organization, you still need to have a way to make sure every level has a buy-in and feedback loop to whatever that decision making is. Because if you don't, very quickly what you have is you have like different ideas about what we should do happening in different places in the company. And then even if the whole company votes to do X, if enough people were like, well, why did we vote to do X? Or actually, I'm really more interested in Y, then X is not going to be very successful, even if it's what you all decide to do, right? And so the right governance and decision-making structure is one that everybody in the room is like, I'm neutral to positive on this will work for us, right? And I'm willing to lean into it. I'm willing to do it, right? And so that may look like everybody makes votes on every decision that we make, down from the minutia about what toilet paper we buy up to the, what's our 5-year plan. It may look like we're deciding we're going to elect a board, and the board will have a very traditional governance process, but when we're in daily staff meetings, we're going to adopt a round table approach, or we're going to adopt a sprint and agile approach. And we're going to weave all that together so that everybody knows what everybody else is doing and knows how to plug in. I will say one thing, that the more diverse your group is, the more wise it is for you to have explicit structures rather than implicit assumptions. Because implicit assumptions are where oppression lives, right? Because then you start getting into common sense and respect and normal, and all of those are power-weighted terms, right? So if you actually want to not just have good decision-making, but anti-oppressive decision-making, right, where you actually are removing all of those, groupthink inducing hegemonies, and you're actually accessing the brilliance of the diverse minds and lived experiences in your room, your structures for decision-making need to kind of remove or work against thinking as a group or assuming you know what you're talking about. Because the minute you assume you're all on the same page, those unequal power structures that we're all swimming in every day will insert themselves into your process. And then you've lost human capital. So you need to make sure you're working against them. And that's most commonly done with explicit rules, right? So you're like, oh, well, how should we do this? Let's talk about it. Let's make an idea and let's test it. And then let's make sure there's an annual point where we say, hey, those rules that we made, do they actually serve us? And then we can renew it. And it's scheduled, it's on the calendar. It's not like a big deal. It's not a crisis. It's just like, oh yeah, now is when we check in about the rules. Awesome. So that was a lot, but that's what I would say.
There's another tweet in there, Amy, where she said governance lives in the space between people. That's just, oh yes.
Yeah. Yeah, governance is not abstract. It's literally you and me talking. And then that's down from the, what are we going to have for dinner, to how should we be a nation state? The whole thing is just in the spaces between people.
Can I just add one thing that is a direct example of that that's worked really well for our team? This is pulled from sociocracy. And when we have a call, we come together and we choose a facilitator. But instead of just voting on who facilitates and that person facilitates, what we do is this like voting in rounds where everybody puts their cursor in, everybody types who they want to facilitate, and then we go around and explain why we picked that person. And then everybody gets to vote again based on that advice or the clarity of how you're thinking. And what has come out of that, and we do that also for other decisions, but what has come out of that is actually bridging some of the diversity, the cognitive diversity on our team, which is vast. Like really different ways of seeing the world in lots of ways that can be extremely generative. And if you don't bridge the gap, they're very, very problematic because you have massive misunderstandings. So just this, like, democracy is not always just a majority. Democracy is also a deep listening and a making space and making processes that include listening as part of what people do. And I just have to say, Sassy, I'm kind of like, yes, I'm just sitting over here going, preach.
Yeah, we clearly need to have coffee later. It's going to be amazing.
I'm so glad I could bring you guys together and get some interesting discussion going. This is great. I love it.
I see thoughts floating out of Greg's brain. Can I hear them from him real quick before we go on to our next thing?
Yes, please.
We're there. I think you guys covered it well. I don't want to go off into 50 tangents. There's so much we could talk about just on governance stuff.
Just vibing, just vibing.
But
excellent.
Anyway, I'll put a few more resources in the chat because there's a lot of good stuff to talk about here.
Awesome. Yeah, I like the point of making it very explicit and, you know, making it like choosing each round. I really love these ideas and these suggestions. All right. So what is one way that we'll start back towards the beginning again. So we'll start back with Greg. What is one way that we can support your mission as we move forward?
Oh, that you can support our mission. Sure. Well, we are open for applications as of yesterday morning for our 2022 accelerator. So if you know cooperative entrepreneurs who or just shared ownership businesses that are looking to take their business next level, we choose 7 or 8 teams a year. And so we'll start those interviews when applications close in a month. We're also always looking for mentors. We're looking for service providers. We've recommended people to Sassy, and we're looking for investors for the fund. So yeah, so if you know people that are interested in creating a cooperative-owned business, would love to talk to them. And I should say one of the ways we support each other is we are a member of Zebras Unite, part of that group. We're one of the founding members, and Zebras Unite was part of our accelerator. So we got a little bit of reciprocity going on even within the call.
Yeah, that principle 6 in action. Cooperation among cooperatives, principle 6. Are you tossing this question to each of us, Amy?
Yeah, so yep, so that's where I was going to toss it down to you next. How do we support your mission?
There's some folks in the room who will need no urging because they're already a part of the membership, but I would say for Zebras Unite, join as a member. We are co-building this new kind of multi-stakeholder movement building social entrepreneurship group. It is going to take all of our brilliance. There's some really incredibly brilliant people in the room, and just an amazing coalition of fellow members and at different levels to be in and co-building with. So I'd say join the membership and join the crew and see how you can plug in and how you can both leverage your brilliance and then take part in the economic benefits that we're actively full steam ahead on building. And then just for Sassy facilitation, that hot, I'd say co-op well to each other and ask for help when you need it. It is important. It is awesome. It is not a failure. It is really a healthy indicator of your company being able to go to the next level of saying, hey, we need some assistance with this, or we'd like to even plan to do it well before we know we need assistance. Like just do that. Even if you don't ask me, if you just ask your neighbor, just ask for help when you need it. So many businesses fail and don't need to because we just did not ask for help. So.
Can you share just a little bit about what joining Zebras United looks like or means to people?
Totally. There's a couple pamphlets. I do a short video. It's on the website, so I'll drop that link in a moment. But what it means is you join as a member, you pay dues, you buy in. Out of that, you get to participate in a social entrepreneurship co-building organization. We have shared purchasing for different tools that you might need. We have shared economic opportunities. We're building a marketplace where we're trying to work on all the amazing capital barriers that Greg outlined in detail. We're trying to do some matching. We're trying to do capital access work. And we're also working on like paradigm shift work. So there's folks coming together in circles. For example, Christina, we have a co-owned digital infrastructure circle where folks are coming together to tackle exactly the conundrum you're working on in coalition with each other. And we're supporting that with actual resources and energy and expertise. So it's really a giant ecosystem of people who are trying to actively build this next economy together. And we're much stronger together than we are apart. And so coming in and being part of that engine and then contributing labor, time, energy, value, and eventually getting to own the profits that come from that is kind of part of the hypothesis that we're pretty sure is going to be borne out. So.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And then Christina, how can we support your mission?
Well, just sign up for Social Roots. We'll let you know when we're ready. Operationalizing cross-group coordination in actual software, which is files and folders and very hierarchical, funnily enough, in lots of ways. It's actually a giant challenge in permissions and the structure of software to get cross-group coordination to work and have like nuanced privacy rather than just private silos or public arenas. And the other thing, I think that part of the mission of Social Roots is to get people involved in cooperative thinking. So start locally, look at food co-ops that are around you, electrical co-ops, look online at the various different tech co-ops that are emerging for shared infrastructure. And we're actually we just found out that we're the first co-op to be funded through the National Science Foundation's what's now called America's Seed Fund. It's been called the SBIR, Small Business Innovation and Research Grant, and they're looking for more. So if you want to have a co-op and want to apply, it's a really significant, amazing fund that really gives you space for research, for like the early stuff that a lot of investors are not interested in because you're so early. To give you that, right? We think we have something really innovative. They're giving us the space and time to do the research so that we hit it right. So, yeah.
Fantastic. And you'll be able to drop that link for us below.
Yeah, it's on our homepage, but also I'll put it in here.
Wonderful. And then we have a question from the audience. Carol, would you like to come off mute and share your question, or would you prefer me to read it aloud?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know we have time for that. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so the basic question is, we are just starting to be a co-op of facilitators, community designers, and developers. And we don't want to track in terms of resource allocation, compensation, design. We don't want to track hours, work like lawyers. And so what might be some alternative ways of, compensating people according to the value of their work? Yeah, thank you.
I'm happy to dive in, but Sassy, you got thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say Greg and I answered some things in the chat, but I would say just one solution I've seen a co-op actually, or a proto co-op actually use that also didn't want to track hours and recognize that just strictly hours actually can end up having a kind of unequal impact, because 5 minutes of one person's time in a certain way can be kind of commensurate in value to the co-op as like 2 hours of someone else's time in a different way. So one thing that group did that I saw that worked very well was they came together and kind of consensed upon a range of time for certain kinds of building activities, certain kinds of like categories of task. And they decided that was, each one of those was assigned essentially like a number of points. And then they measured points and they accrued points and tracked that. So as a way of kind of abstracting a little bit and creating a little bit more of an average of value, but you do need to track something, because that's then how you not only get a good picture of the data of what it takes to build your company, which you really do need for good and wise planning and honoring the founders and the founding energy. And it's just really hard to then, once you are profitable or are making good work, to turn back around and actually close that value loop without actually just some numbers. So I would say that would be my only advice there.
Yeah, just to add that, I mean, most teams have like a salary. I get that you guys are early and you can't pay salary yet, but usually there's like, if it's helpful thing about there's a typical salary like as any other job, and then you would split end of the year profits, which we paid out as patronage dividends. But Saz is right. You got to choose some formula to, if you had $100 at the end of the year, how would you allocate that between the members, right? And so that formula can be as complicated or as simple as you want, and you got to decide what are we willing to track. And so you could just say, everyone's going to share equally in $100, but most of the time people want to come up with something that's a little more proportional to the value that people put in. One formula I've seen a few teams do recently, and we're working on a case study about this, is they'll do like, the hours times that person's hourly rate, and everyone else on the team has to agree on what the rate people are charging per hour. So you sort of have to, there's this cool group in Europe called the Camp Lighters. If you look up Camp Lighters Co-op, I'll try to put the link in the chat. But basically when someone comes on, they ask the new person to research what would you be paid in a commensurate role somewhere else, and show us why. And then the group has to approve that. And then what they're tracking is how many hours you put in times that rate. And they're tracking it all on a Trello board of like, how many hours did you do in each project? But if you don't want to track hours, you still need to figure out something else that you can actually allocate at the end of the year.
Buffer.
It's usually hours, but it can be tenure, it can be different things.
Buffer and August are two organizations that have really thought through some of this. How do we do fair salaries that are not just based on time? And August, I'm not finding it in their public drive right now, but they have like their whole Google Drive is public. Like they really work out loud. So I'll give you the link to their site. You can dig around in there. And then I think the Buffer link is in a blog post here. I'll try and get the link into the chat.
Sorry about that. Just trying to paste something into the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Carol. Are there any other questions from the audience that we have?
Good stuff.
I'll just say if nobody answers, I have a follow-up question, but I'll let somebody take that opportunity first.
I don't see any hands raised, either visually or with the reaction. So go ahead, Carol.
Thank you. On the compensation piece, actually we are a small group and we might later invite some members, but in a highly selective fashion. So given we're a small group, we're actually wanting to experiment with something that's more radical. For example, need-based compensation. Are we crazy? Have you seen any lessons learned or kind of any other things that comes to mind you want to share?
I'll jump because I actually just took a class on this. And then Greg, I totally want to hear your points. There's an amazing organization in the Bay Area called the Sustainable Economies Law Center. Their website is theselk.org. They just held a workshop on this exact thing of how do you do needs-based salary and avoid legal complications in the US context, because there are protection laws that interestingly have the effect of perpetuating oppressive dynamics, because since you're not allowed to discriminate based on race, you're also not allowed to, for example, be proactive based on race in terms of addressing racial historical gaps and gender, et cetera, et cetera. So A, you're not crazy at all. B, I've seen a lot of worker co-ops that do this. The US Federation of Worker Cooperatives, DAWI, the Aorta, which is an amazing anti-oppression resource and training organization, a lot of worker co-ops that I am aware of, and those are the ones that are, right, this makes sense because a worker co-op, the members are the staff. And so if you have agency, if that's your ownership loop, then you get to set your salary very directly and proactively. And so that's the form of cooperative that I have most often seen experiment with compensation, because it's very, it's really close to the reason they're a co-op. But I've seen a lot of them experiment with cost of living indicators, whether or not you have children, whether or not what genders you are, and if you're a 2-parent household, a single parent household, a 2-women household, a 2-men household, right? So there's a lot of things you can weave into that. And the workshop that the Selk just did as part of their co-op week, they actually publicly shared their calculator. So that's there as a resource. So you're not crazy, do it.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, that's a great answer. I was just going to add, there's an article we just shared today on social media about a bunch of game worker co-ops, which I didn't even know some of these companies existed, but there's one, I just put in the chat, specifically mentioned the article that does it based on need. So you might want to check them out. Looks like the company is called Soft Not Weak. I don't know, but anyway, if you'll see it in the article. So you can check that out. But there's two interesting levers here to play with. So one is like the salary and one is the patronage dividends at the end of the year. And so you think about how to use both to design what you guys are trying to do. And the cool thing about a co-op structure is if you guys all decide you want to do it, like you can do it. You guys own the company. So, what I've seen teams do is maybe to Sassy's point, maybe do it more based on need, on salary, right? Like this person has a higher cost of living, but then maybe the dividends then a year are more proportional to like how many hours or whatever you decide for that final formula. So I think play with those two levers to find the right balance for your team. And then just, and then make sure people are cool with it. Do some sort of integrative consent or something to make sure people are like, all right, we get why we're going to pay this person a little bit more or whatever. And you just want to really test to make sure there isn't resentment if you go down that road.
And build in some natural proactive check-in points, right? Like check in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, like just make sure that like you have a revisiting point on the agenda already and it's not a big deal, so that, if anybody's feeling a little bit not okay, but not like big enough to make a big deal about it, there's still a moment where you can adjust when the issues are small and you can experiment with a lower stakes than if it's, you let it fester for too long. Exactly.
Right. And people do get really sensitive around salaries. So just remember that, like, you don't want to be in a situation down the road where you ever have to tell someone your salary is going to go down. Do you know what I mean? So like nothing burns trust faster than that. So just think that through ahead of time.
And I will say, I'll add one more thing in, which is you mentioned you're kind of a little more radical. Well, thank you. Awesome. So glad to be in community with you. And the Selk calculator, actually, they created an opt-in and opt-outable reparations clause to the salary. So if you, and this is an American context, so if you are a descendant of slaves, there is a way that they build in reparations into their salary. And if you're, not a descendant of slaves, you opt out of it, or you are invited to opt out of it. And if you're a descendant of slaves, you get reparations for your salary. So they went there and they found a way to make it work legally because they're a co-op of lawyers. So there's some pretty edge pushing work being done in this world.
Wow, thank you so much. You guys saved me days or weeks of research. Really appreciate it.
I'm glad we could be of help and have such wonderful, kind people answering our questions today. So Todd Youngblood has the question: would you prefer to read it, come off mute and read it, or would you rather I read it aloud?
Sure, I can read it, or I just ask it. So speaking to you with co-op leadership, are there any guidebooks or templates that you use to help you build some of the basic kind of decision-making processes in your organization? And do you have any recommendations for resources for like member guidebooks that can be kind of built on top of for a platform cooperative?
I'll jump on with you on that, Sassy, and Sam Sharp more. We've shared a few on our website. We've got this course we call Lean Co-op. We put out a few months ago. We're really excited about, which is a self-guided free course for people creating co-ops to kind of get people going. We just rolled out a tool called the Ownership Model Canvas that is really cool. Where basically it's like the business canvas, but it's for your ownership model, and it's a way to kind of say, let's lay out our governance rights and our financial rights and what the requirements are, and so that's a cool tool. And then we just added something new we just relaunched our website a week ago. So we had a thing we haven't even shared yet called the Bylaw Starter Kit. It's basically like a PDF of like the most common questions you'll have to deal with in creating your bylaws. But what's nice about if you answer the questions about a starter kit, you can kind of use it as like the start of a member manual kind of thing. So we encourage people to, like, it's really easy to walk away with a set of bylaws that a lawyer does that your team doesn't actually understand. I see that a lot. And so, going through these questions, you won't be able to answer all of them, but it at least will allow you to like start putting down kind of a plain language version of it that then could become like a member guide. So those are a few resources you can check out.
Thanks, Greg. And I love the Lean Startup course. I've gone through it. It's
Awesome.
good.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
That was fun. I'll just chime in, and Todd, I would say we're going to be building a few of those in Zebras momentarily, so I'll
Looking
just
forward to it.
you're going to be in that conversation. Todd is a current member of Zebras Unite through his amazing company, and on my website in the toolkit, which I've already shared in there, I have a bunch of Creative Commons licensed tools that are pretty targeted. I'm gonna zoom out at one point and weave a bunch of them together, but I have about 5 or 6 tools in there that are specifically like worksheets or spreadsheets you can literally plug numbers into that help with high stakes kinds of decisions. So they're really like, proactive tools for, okay, we need to make a decision as a group, but there's something big involved, like a diversity of preferences or origin story, or a lot of money, or just value or time, or there's facts and feelings involved. So I have a bunch of tools that help kind of parse those and guide you through that, as well as just some like basic, here's what a co-op meeting might look like, and here's a template for you to fill out, and a facilitation guide on there as well. But I'll say that, a really easy way to get some of this info is to call up a local co-op or call up a co-op that's like yours and say, hey, would you mind having a Principle 6 conversation for 15 minutes of your time? I have a specific question, and this is the cool company I'm starting, and we want to be in solidarity with you. Like, that's part of our model, is Principle 6, cooperation among cooperatives. Like I do that all the time, and I just get to pick reciprocally pick the brains of a whole bunch of people. And they call me up when they have a question, and I call them up. And sharing models, like share the handbook around, is a lot more accessible in this world than we are led to assume. So just do that. I literally modeled the first bylaws of the company I converted off of a worker cafe that I loved going to. I said, hey, with my coffee, can I read your bylaws? And they're like, sure. And I'm like, great, there we go. So just ask.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll just add this article from Jason Weiner, who is a lawyer in Colorado doing a lot of work on the LCA model, the Limited Cooperative Association, which is really made for software because it has that investor layer. It's kind of like a mashup between the sort of LLC versus the corporation, making it a little bit lighter weight, but still allowing multi-stakeholder. So that sort of investor layer, if you're doing a platform cooperative, might be interesting to look at.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you all. Yeah, great resources and responses.
Thanks, Todd. Any other questions out there in the Zoom room, the Zoom world? See any hands raised? All right.
I think we can start, we can have a breakout room, but probably for 10 minutes. So hope everyone can take this respect the value of equity to get everyone, 1 or 2 minutes, or those who really have questions, like burning questions, more time to speak up. And then we're gonna bring everyone up back to the main room at probably 2 minutes to the 8:30, it's pretty late, to just have the closing. So I'm gonna start the breakout room, and thank you again for the amazing panel. There we go. Sorry, are you able to see the rooms? Okay. Mhm. I'm not so sure why, but I think I need to assign. Hi there, is anyone still here? Sorry, I'm not so sure what's going on.
You probably know Pak Yen. I don't know. She's a lawyer, co-op lawyer, and then she helped us kind of drafted the sample document of operating agreement.
Okay.
Because we're we're now an LLC but operating as a co-op.
Yep. Very common.
And then that we're just like reading it and I feel like a lot of it is over. It's not directly over our head, but then the language doesn't necessarily resonate with our language. Sometimes our language is more radical, and so we're right now personally I feel a little stuck of like what's the next step, how to make this more alive rather than just the legal jargon. Yeah.
there's a really fun, so again, Selk does one of the earliest things they did as a kind of, they're a employee governed nonprofit is how they are. So similar to y'all in that they took a non-cooperative form and cooperativized it, which is, I've also, most of the worker co-ops I was a part of were LLCs. And so there's a layer, and I talk about this a lot with folks, there's two structures to your organization when you're doing that. There's the foundation and then there's the house, right? So the foundation is the LLC. The foundation is your operating agreements that are legal, signed, and filed, right? That the foundation interacts with things like zoning law and the banks and the external world that needs to have a intelligible foundation for them to understand who you are and support you and give you funding and not give you a lot of problems. Then there's the house. The house is actually where you move around, right? The house is actually what shapes your company and how your day goes and what work you produce and what kinds of possibilities are scaffolded into existence. What you want to do is you want to work on the house, right? And so some early work that Selk did was they actually pioneered a process where you can take your bylaws and make a cartoon of them, right? Make a comic strip, section by section, of just stick figures talking to each other. What does this actually mean, right? And then through that process, you can kind of start breaking down what is legalese for the sake of speaking this foundation-based language, and what if this is actually something we want to shape the house, right? And then that allows you, once you pull those out, right, you can have, for example, your operating agreements can reference your company manual. That company manual can change all the time. That company manual can be as cooperative as you want. It can say, we're going to be an anarchist for-profit bakery, right? You can do that kind of dynamic tension and radical work in a document that's referenced in the operating agreements, but doesn't change as frequently, right? Or it can change more frequently. Your operating agreements kind of got to stay static. You can interpret the parts of it. So your operating agreements probably have a section about governance, right? And that's your basics. You can look at that as your foundational floor. You can build onto that as much as you want. And as long as you don't directly contravene the laws that you are existing within, then you're good. You can do literally anything you want. But I definitely encourage you that first step of take your existing work or the existing legal documents and translate them into human language. And I find art a really good forcing function to do that, right? If I can't draw it in a stick figure, then it's too complicated, right? And I need to break it down to its constituent parts even more. Whatever your forcing function is to take it to translate it into operational language, and then you can begin to say, okay, well, we've got these 3 points of governance that needs to happen. How do we want that to look, right? And then it's easy. And I would always say, just like start with your daily meetings. What do you love about how you collaborate with each other, right? What makes you excited to work with these people or do this work? And then try and distill that to its like component parts, and then apply them in a lot of places and see what happens. Right? Like, what do you like about working with each other? What do you like about your weekly stand-ups? Or and don't focus on what you hate, because our brains are already wired to over-index to the negative. We don't need to help that. That's going to happen on its own. So over-index consciously toward the positive, and then find those and make those your design criteria, and then play with it for 3 months, 3 cycles, whatever that is for you. And then stop, iterate, and change, and then write it down. Dear God, write it down.
On that point, Sassy, what do you do differently, or do you think that's unique to your organization that really cultivate a culture? You mentioned a weekly stand-up, but what else do you find effective?
Yeah, so Zebras really is a wonderful, we have a very consciously engaged in culture. I think there was some there's a widespread engagement with the fact that there's a lot of diversity in the room, right? Like it's all people who identify as women, but we have different ages, different races, different ethnicities, different faiths, different global cultures, different time zones, kind of hugely different time zones. And so because that was already on the table, that had to be in front. So we knew we had to be proactive about culture because there was no shared norm around almost anything. The only thing we all shared is that we all, experienced patriarchy on the negative side, right? That's a lovely common ground, right? We can work with that, but it was, we needed to be proactive. And so in needing to be proactive, we just, every time we do a thing as a team or we build a structure, we also go a little bit above it and go, does this work for everybody? Is this working? Do we like this? So there's the doing the thing and the talking about how you're doing the thing. And being able to easily bounce between those levels means that you can tweak and iterate pretty easily. And you can also and it means also that when you get stuck, right? Because we do get stuck when you have a wide diversity of people, the people on the very edges are sometimes going to bump heads a lot, right? And so you're going to get stuck. So being able, instead of sticking at this level where you're stuck, being able to go up a level and say, hold on, there might be a reason why we're stuck and it might be structural. How about we work on that for a little while? We have common ground on not wanting to be stuck, right? Like that, being able to move levels really, really helps a group kind of navigate being not just different, but also faced with real substantive challenges, which make us all anxious or sad or tired or not at our best. So I'd say that's the thing that I see this group walk that talk more successfully than many, and it's pretty inspiring.
Fascinating. Sarah, do you have any questions before we go back to the main room?
No. Carol's questions are my questions and the other way around. So this is really, really
Awesome.
helpful. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you,
I'm gonna bring
Sassy.
everyone back to the main room. Thank you,
All right.
Sassy.
Together we shall go. But yeah, no, and
Sassy,
in general,
just real quick, how would you, if we want to work with you and then, we're starting, we don't have a lot of money, but we want to make it, enjoyable for you too. So
Yeah.
how, I'm happy to contact you later, but just, let me know how can we work with you?
Yeah. So in Zebra's hat, reach out and, you're part of the community. We have community resources. We're cultivating a lot of stuff in that. So there's a lot of peer-to-peer kinds of support that I'm curating and we're working within. There's a whole circle in Zebra's right now that's just coming together for people who are in co-managed, co-owned organizations. It's like a problem-solving group, right? We're just going to peer support each other. And then in Sassy Facilitation, hit my website, it's got a contact form. I have a sliding scale and a pro bono fund. Let's talk.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, there's Greg. Is everyone back? Okay,
I
that's
think
more or
so.
less. Okay, I think we're gonna close, but just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you again for all the amazing panelists. So we are going to we're gonna have all the speakers' profile on LinkedIn again, so feel free to reach out to them. And also at the same time, we would love to have more like-minded people to join the community. We're a very broad SDG focused community, and we're also actively exploring the co-op model. So if you would like to be a co-creator, we welcome anyone to reach out to us. So thank you again, and I will give Amy to close off.
All right. So I just have one last question for each of our panelists. If they have any upcoming events or promotional things that they want to share with the rest of the audience and add into the chat, I will be downloading the chat so that we can pull out all of these resources and try and add as many of those into the follow-up email as possible. But any last resources or events coming up that you guys want to share?
I'd say the only thing is if you want to join Zebras Unite Co-op, currently we're doing small open enrollment windows. They're kind of invite only. I would love to invite you all. Next one's early December. So get at us and we will, come build this thing that you can also own as you build it.
Is this for individuals or orgs or both?
All of the above. We have a big wide funnel right now and a bunch of hypotheses about how we're going to bring all the different levels in that we would love to test with you.
I know that we're a member, but it was Anna that did that. So
I'm gonna find you in my system. We'll talk
I will
shop.
explore. Yes, we will.
And we're always looking for new co-ops who want to apply to the accelerator. People want to use the tools, give us feedback on the tools we've put out there free, and then mentors and people want to invest in co-ops. So if you're a mentor or investor or entrepreneur, happy to talk to you about what we're doing. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, and all of the LinkedIns have been dropped in the chat. We'll also share connection data in the follow-up email. Thank you everyone for coming, and we'll try to get you guys out of here. Thank you so much. Take
Can we
care.
unmute and just applause for our
Oh, yeah.
speakers?
Yay! Can we get a
Thank
screenshot?
you.
Jesse, can you screenshot it real quick?
Yes, I can. Okay, don't
Yay.
move. All right, everybody. 1, 2.
Clap! Yay! There we go.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night, great morning, great day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.